All right, it looks like we're live. Welcome all of our panelists and viewers to our next Google Hangout on Air. Topic today is really to discuss student achievement data, that piece of the teacher's evaluation. But before we dig into that, I just want our panelists, those whose visual image is present on the screen, to just introduce yourself. So why don't we just, I don't know if you guys see the same order that I see on the bottom of the screen. Next to me, I have Katie Bonney, and so why don't we just go down that order?
Hi, I'm Katie Bonney, principal at the International School at Bertha Vos and IB coordinator for Interlochen and International School at Bertha Vos.
Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
Yeah.
Yes, I see that. It's my first time with this. I'm Tara McConnell, and I'm a fourth grade teacher at Old Mission.
Hi, I'm Joe Esper. I'm the principal at West Senior High.
Hi, I'm Jessie Houghton. I'm the principal at Westwoods Elementary.
Hi, I'm Erin Banton. I'm a first grade teacher at Old Mission Peninsula School.
Hey there everyone, I'm David Rowney. I teach 3rd, 4th and 5th grade at the International School at Bertha Vos.
Hi, I'm Beth Stell. I'm the principal at Old Mission and the Title I coordinator.
Brandy is also on this call, kind of managing all the, managing how the Hangout kind of works. So, a review of, for those in the viewing audience, how to submit a question is right there on the screen. On the lower right-hand side of the window you're watching, you should see a green button that says Ask a New Question. Click on it, and you have 255 characters, apparently, that you can use to ask your question. And then Brandy kind of alerts us of incoming questions that we can answer. So, before we dig into the specifics of what's in the student achievement data for TCAPS teachers, I wanted to talk about the why we're here a little bit, and certainly would any of, especially Joe and Jesse, to add to the context of what I'm saying related to why we're addressing this. So we've gone from a situation, and this is all in the context, by the way, of a very active legislature. So where we need to respond fairly quickly. Last year, the law was that 25% needed to be student achievement data, and there was a lot of stuff related to that, and we really didn't have a consistent way that we were doing that across TCAPS. And so how we addressed it consistently is we just had principals work with each individual teacher during the goal setting time. That was the only standardization that we had, was that in the one-on-one meetings between principals and teachers, they would individually agree at the onset what data would be used on their evaluation. So in that case, at least it wasn't a surprise what would be used, that each individual teacher knew in their fall goal-setting meeting the data that they'd be judged by at the end of the year. But then a lot of the feedback that we got at the end of the year was how that would lead to a lot of inconsistency, just because we have 550 to 600 teachers in the district, and we had 550, 600 different data sets that then were becoming a part of a teaching evaluation. And so from the concern of having a consistent measure, that really became salient. So then that's really what's led us to this work then. It's like, okay, we really thought that having a consistent data set that would be applicable across, so all PE teachers would have all elementary PE teachers anyway would have, basically the same set of student achievement data that they would be measured by, all first grade teachers, et cetera, et cetera. So, but then you start thinking about that, phys ed teachers, music teachers, industrial arts teachers at the high school or what have you, it can start to get pretty pretty overwhelming, which is probably why the state has been in and out of this. It's been something I think they've discovered just how big of a bite this was to bite off and try to chew as far as a project goes. So anyway, that's the why that we're here, is that there was it really came from listening to teachers saying we really need a consistent measure. So then the next level of work, the reason why Joe Esper and Jesse Houghton are on the call is that they're one of their lateral duties that they're given, that principals in our district are principals, but they also have sort of a district level leadership role that's quote unquote a lateral duty, and that has to do with testing and data. So here they are, and so then my charge to them was how are we gonna how are we gonna tackle this? How are we going to involve teachers in this? Get feedback from teachers and have them really, how are we going to get the voice of the teacher involved in the setting and the calibrating of these metrics? So Joe and Jesse, you want to kind of take it from here and talk about that process, and then we can get into what actually came out of it in terms of data.
Sure.
Do you want to start, Jess?
Sure. So I think the other piece of this too that Sander brushed over a little bit too is how do we include the instructional impact too on teacher evaluations? How do we document the good work that teachers are doing through student achievement results that are fair and understandable by all too? I think of an evaluation, I tell my teachers, this is a chance for us to document all the great work that you're doing, and for you to really be proud, and for you to say, man, that had a really strong educational impact on my kids, and here's why I'm saying that, here's how I know that. So in the fall, as we knew we were moving towards this, Joe and I reached out to all of the instructional leaders, the principals, and the teachers who were in charge of their disciplines, and sort of did a first feel on what metrics do they value and what metrics would make sense for them to collect data on and then have discussions at that district level about. Joe, I'll let you comment now.
And so once we had some baseline idea of, say, for physical education, for music, for science, some baseline idea of what metrics were available, then we had to kind of go through that list and try to pare it down, because we want to try to take not only get towards a system that's more consistent and fair for teachers, but that's also less confusing. And so if for a particular teacher in a particular content area there's 8 or 9 different measures being used, sometimes that gets more confusing and gets further away from being able to use it for improvement. So when we were going through and kind of paring down what metrics might be used, we always started with, first of all, if there was something that was more of a national assessment and nationally normed, and it was truly growth data that had, you could think of it basically as a pre-test and a post-test, or some kind of baseline and something to measure the change over time. If we had that, that was always the first choice. In the absence of some kind of nationally normed data, we'd look for state-type data, regional-type data, district-wide data, and then kind of getting down to classroom-level data.
Let me jump in there too, Joe, just to make a point for our teachers. There's an awful lot of questions around growth and how it's measured, and around proficiency. So some of the things that I'll hear, especially from teachers, in terms of let's just use elementary teachers as an example. Teachers who are teaching at some of our most at-risk buildings will say, "Hey, if you're going to base my evaluation on student achievement, because I teach in this really at-risk school with all these impoverished, with a lot of kids from impoverished backgrounds that are quote unquote at-risk kids, I'm already behind the 8 ball. I'm not going to be able to do well on my evaluation," and that's actually a misnomer, total misnomer, if it's growth data. And Rick, if you could mute your mic. Thanks for joining the call. actually the opposite is really true. That that if you were using proficiency, then that would be 100% correct. Using proficiency, it is different from using growth. So our data actually right now, so some of the strongest growth data that we're getting is out of our most at-risk schools. So anyway, I just wanted to put that in the hangout here because there's a understanding the difference between growth data and proficiency data that because some of our kids at our most at-risk schools kind of come in low, they actually demonstrate a tremendous amount of growth as they're trying to get to proficiency. So anyway,
and I'm going to add too that we do realize that there's not one single assessment or data point out there that will capture all of student learning, and we absolutely realize this and understand that. However, we want to be fair and consistent with the evaluation process, and so we're going to narrow that scope down to what assessments are objective and normed, and allow us to look at what is the individualized projected growth for this student, and then did they meet that growth on the end of the year assessment. So those were sort of our factors too in considering from this long list of possible metrics, what should we choose. We still know that classroom teachers are going to use many different forms of assessment to inform their instruction, and we expect that. We expect certain teachers to use daily check-ins with students, conferencing, teacher-written assessments, grade-level written assessments to inform where they need to go with their instruction too.
Yep. And I should point out too, Sander made a great point about the difference between growth data and proficiency data, and because of what he said about growth data, when it was available, we always gravitated towards that. But the reality of it is, regardless of the fact that we're multiple years into this requirement that data be part of evaluation, there's not a lot of great growth data out there available for principals, teachers, and even students to look at. It just hasn't developed as quickly as legislators might have expected it to. Like one common metric you'll see in the rubrics for teachers is NWEA data for a lot of our 2nd through 8th grade teachers, and that's good growth data. It's given multiple times per year. It's built off a continuum. It's about growth. It's not about grade level proficiency, and it's nationally normed. But NWA is an assessment the district chooses to provide. It's not provided by the state. So, and I just bring that up because as you look through some of the rubrics in a moment here, you'll look at some of that and you'll say, well, that's proficiency data. That's just about where students are at a particular point in time, and that's true because in areas where growth data didn't exist, we had to go with proficiency data in the absence of anything else. So to try to make that fair, though, this year, what principals, curriculum leaders, and some of the data specialists in the district have done over the last number of months is taken the metrics that were identified and then trying to figure out what's normal for each of those metrics. And I'll give you 2 contrasting examples. At the high school level, advanced placement classes. We have 16 or 17 different advanced placement classes we offer at the high school level. Advanced placement is a College Board test. It's a national test. We have classes that are aligned. Teachers go to advanced placement training, so they're able to teach classes that lead students to passing that test. And essentially that's a proficiency measure. It's a one-time test, and you either show enough knowledge and skills to write a 3, 4, or 5 and pass the AP test, or you don't have that level of knowledge and skills and you don't pass. It's not about how much have you increased over the course of the year. It's are you at this college level point or not. So it's a proficiency example. But still, to put it on a scale where at the end of the year you can say, does this classroom earn a 1, 2, 3, or 4 on the scale? Again, in the Marzano scale, we know a 3 is kind of the norm. The 3 is the target. So to figure out the target, we've gone back and looked at 5 years of national data about what percentage of kids usually pass. What percentage of kids in similar situations usually pass, and then compare it to years of data for TCAPS kids, what percentage of kids usually pass. And so I don't have that exact rubric up in front of me, but the target for a TCAPS teacher to get a 4, which means above normal, isn't 90%. it's actually in the 60% range. It's about 62, 63%, somewhere around there, right, Jesse?
Yeah, I'm pulling it up right now.
Yeah. And you know, on paper, someone might say 62, 63%. That doesn't sound very good. That doesn't sound like a great number of kids passing. Well, if it exceeds what normally happens nationally, then if that's what occurred in your classroom, it should be a 4. So Jesse's wrote in the comments there that it's 61%.
To
And
be a
that lines
4.
up. To be a 4.
Mhm.
And that lines up because we know from the awards we've gotten at Central and at West that our teachers and our kids have earned is that we perform better than the nation in that area, so the rating should align to that. That's kind of a proficiency example of how things were scaled out.
Okay, so before we jump into, let's move forward here and start showing some of the, you know, putting up some of the slides that I know that we've got prepared. Are there any questions so far from the teachers or the principals on our panel? Okay.
I do.
Great. Go ahead.
This is an NWEA question, so if it's not appropriate at this time, just let me know. If a student makes their projected growth in the winter, but they make it in the winter for the spring. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So if they already make their projected growth, does the projected growth change to give them another chance to grow? I've never really realized that till I looked at my first grader, looked at her data yesterday.
No, NWA is set up for when the student takes the test in the fall, it projects what that spring score will be. So for grades 2 through 8, we are using did that student hit that projected growth over the whole school year. So if they hit it in the winter, most likely they're going to maintain or grow even more, we would hope, with 5 months more of instruction. So they should exceed that by that springtime. Now, for grades K and 1, we decided to use the winter to correct. Yep. And there's not a target. NWA doesn't produce a projected growth from winter to spring. So we're going to look at the percentile change. So if the student in the winter tested at the 70th percentile, for example, in the spring we would expect that student to maintain their percentile. If they maintain that percentile, the 70th percentile in the spring, they've made their projected growth. When NWA talks about, hey, did the student make projected growth, it doesn't mean that they've moved up percentile rankings. It means that they've grown the same amount as their peers across the country in this assessment, right? So you expect a kid at the 70th percentile to maintain that percentile or gain throughout the year. And if they don't maintain that growth with everyone else, then they haven't made their projected growth for the year.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we had teachers, or we had principals and district level leaders like Caroline Walker, district level leader of art, engaged art teachers, K-12 art teachers across the district in a conversation about what should go into the student achievement measure. We had principals engaging their classroom teachers. We had Pam Alfieri, who's district level leader for music and performing arts, doing that with music teachers, and so we've come up with a set of data that I guess I don't want to delay any longer, and let's get into showing that. And so I know Joe, you and Jesse have a set of slides together, right, to share.
Yep. Brandy, are you going to screen share that? Okay, so that slide there was some of the background Sandra talked about why we're doing this. Can you jump to the next one?
This next one shows the belief statements that we framed a lot of the work around, and as we talked to site leaders, district level teachers, and different stakeholders in the process, this was sort of our message to them as to, hey, this is why we're doing this.
Go ahead, Brandy.
Yeah, I think most of this we've talked about.
Yep.
Where is the slide?
Brandy, can you put a link to that in the comments too, so people can jump to it?
Because I see, for Brandy, I see this white thing with, looks like there might be words on it, but only I can only see me in my big screen. So
Oh,
shouldn't I be seeing?
Click
Kira,
on.
if you click on if you click on me, Kara, you'll see then what I'm
Oh,
sharing.
okay. Thank you. Again, first time. Thank you.
yep, that work? Okay. So this slide here is what principals will talk to their teachers about in each building. And because of the snow days, this probably would have likely already occurred, but it's going to probably happen later this week or next week, depending on your building. We just did it today at West. But it shows teachers how to get to their the individual rubrics, and then it kind of talks about some key components that are included in a lot of the different rubrics. So we'll just start with that individual rubric. The rubrics are consistent across the district, but they're also customized by teacher assignment. So like a 9th through 12th grade math teacher has a different rubric than a 9th through 12th grade science teacher, and then a middle school physical education teacher, those types of things.
So Brandy, can you click on that link and open up the rubrics folder so we can go through a few of them?
So this opens up a Google folder, and I know the writing on those folders is probably too small for the viewers to see, but it's just broken down into elementary, high school, middle school. Special education has its own folder. Specials has its own folder. Should have art, world language, music, PE, some of those. And then social workers and counselors have their own folder. So your example a second ago, was it first grade? I think it was first grade. We can take a look at that. So we'd go in the elementary folder here. And there's 2 rubrics in the elementary folder. Brandy clicked on the one for thank you, Brandy, for kindergarten through first grade core teacher. Can you expand that at all?
I'm working on it.
Okay.
So one of the things that you'll see is that the weights, the percentages in the weights will total 25%, because again, this student achievement piece of the evaluation is worth 25% of the overall teacher evaluation. And next to each metric, it tells you exactly how much that metric specifically is worth.
So these are these already shared with our teachers?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I have a copy.
So looking at this rubric, it's the K1 core teacher. So the first metric on there is the NWA, and you'll notice it says the winter to spring only. That's their reading. That's going to be 7.5% of the total weight. Then their math is the other 7.5%. There's a district writing rubric that makes up the 5%. And then the bottom level is consistent on every teacher and principal's rubric across the district is a school level growth goal. For teachers, it's a 5% weight. And that is something that's going to be determined by each site, and we determine that based on the prior 3 years of school rankings within the state, and then all employees, teachers, and principals within that site receive the same rating for that school level growth, which is worth 5% of the overall evaluation.
So what questions do you have so far, teachers or principals, related to what's been presented so far?
Well, I guess that I'm just wondering about if the teacher hasn't been at a school for 3 years. Let's say they change into your school. I mean, it may be a blessing for their evaluation, or it may not. Do you know what I'm saying? So,
yep.
This is the first I'm seeing of the 5%. It may have been presented before, based on school improvement.
Yeah.
When did that come up, or when did that?
This is the first year that
Well, I know it's the first year
that buildings are using that, and what it comes from, some of the things in the existing legislation and a lot of the pending legislation. We still expect there's going to be legislation that passes every year about evaluation. It's a hot topic in the legislature every year. But all of that includes points about having to use state data, having to use 3 years of data, and having where it's applicable to have this school level growth thing built in there. So that's something we're going to start using this year in TCAPS. The scenario you talk about, though, can be a really common one, especially in elementary, about I'm in a building this year that I wasn't in the previous 3 years, so I'm kind of inheriting this number, and that that is it's not an ideal situation, especially with this first year starting out. One thing Sanders done to kind of make this more reasonable is the scale we have for that, which actually for the school level growth only goes 2, 3, and 4. There's no 1. No school can get a 1, even regardless of how things went on the state stuff. Even schools that were at a 2 this year, we're going to let people know that it was at a 2, so they can kind of look at the historical data and why. But then this year, even the 2s will be adjusted to be 3s. So every teacher in the district is going to get a 3 or a 4 in that 5%. We don't want it to be the determination that pulls anybody down or anything like that. It's just a way to get everybody in tune with the idea that we all own that data, we all own those kids, and especially in the district the last couple of years, there's been a real hyper focus on some of our schools earning that reward status from the state, the Montessori school and Corte. I believe those are the only 2 this year, right, Sander?
Yeah.
Reward status. That comes from the school percentile ranking that 5% is based on. And in the schools that are having to deal with the stipulations of being a focus school, that comes from that same percentile ranking. So it creates a way to have a conversation as a building about how we all own that, and also talking about how we can all do small things in our roles at the schools to work out of that. So it's to get people in tune with that this year, and we've made it a real soft kind of entry point to using that school level growth. We want to get people comfortable with this year, because that's something that it looks like legislatively and also probably just good practice is going to continue to be part of the metric part of evaluation into the future.
David, you or Aaron have any comments or questions?
I was actually about to come in on that, Sander. One of the things I've been thinking about is at the other end of the spectrum. Not often with growth, we're focusing on interventions. We're talking about kids that are struggling. At the other end, when you get those really talented children, particularly with a subject like reading, when it reaches a point of those students, especially in the elementary school, where the content of the next level up in their development becomes questionable in terms of its appropriateness for the elementary school setting. Having been part-time librarian for the first 2 years of our school, I'm aware of the fact that there are certain books that are not allowed in the elementary school libraries, yet I've gone around the school district and visited other classrooms, and they're in the classroom setting. So my question is that what happens then when you reach a point where you think, you know what, these books, the next level up for this kid is not an appropriate content. There may be some inappropriate. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I do. I think it's in the general context of the challenge that's really always been there, but how do we differentiate, or how do we meet the needs of all of our learners? And then, your question about library books is sort of a microcosm of that macro issue of how do we do that. So one of the things that I would just say that is going to feed into it's a next level of work that we're really exploring is making that commitment as a district about how we will move forward to ensure that that we're supporting teachers with continued job-embedded professional development and how to get at what you just said, along with materials, along with actual access to the library books or what have you. But I think we've had teachers make good arguments about, well, if I have a kid absolutely soaring, it's harder to keep them soaring sometimes than it is, and have them keep growing, than it is sometimes a child that comes in who's really low. They're equally challenging things. I'm just saying that we don't want to ignore any of the kids we start talking about focus schools, which is a whole nother Google Hangout probably, but there's a top 30, there's a middle 40%, and then there's a bottom 30, and sort of how the state kind of divides up student achievement at a state level. All of our kids are somewhere in those, and we have a responsibility, as it's outlined on our one-page strategic plan, to challenge each and every learner in our district. So we're putting processes in place to get at that, David, and I just think that one of the things to keep in mind is that we're always, any library book that exists anywhere within TCAPS, you're able to get, and so I think that you can talk through that with Katie and our library media specialist about how to handle that, but I know that that's only a small piece of what your question is.
Yeah, I mean, the issue for me is that, like I've got a third grader who's operating, according to NWA, they're coming in at 7th, 8th grade reading level in terms of where those scores are. But I'm not going to let that kid who's a third grader pick up Hunger Games or Divergent, which is, that's the appropriate context, that's the level of comprehension and vocabulary that they're at. But the content of that book is not age appropriate. So my question would be, where do you go from there? I spent a lot of my most recent parent conference talking to these, the strongest kids the strongest readers in my groups, that they need to go this way now for a while, because the next level up in terms of the book is just inappropriate for their age.
Well, let's not get stuck here, but I would just say I'd want to challenge us on that, because whenever I hear this idea about going this way instead of continuing to ratchet it up, it makes me nervous, because it sounds like we're placing limits on kids, and I know that that's not what you're saying,
No.
David, but I think that that's how some people can interpret that. So anyway, we want to continually challenge kids and continually accelerate, no matter where they are, bottom 30, middle 40, top 30. And John Hattie has some interesting things to say about this idea of developmental appropriateness and some of the assumptions that we make about stuff being appropriate or not, depending on where a kid's learning level is and all that. Let's set that aside, though, so that we can continue to hammer away at these evaluation metrics. But that's, it's just like everything and what we talk about. I mean, the work that you guys do as teachers and principals in the classrooms with kids every day is so dynamic and so rich that we could have, we could do almost a graduate course on any single topic that's brought up, but want to stay focused on the student achievement metrics here. So let's keep going. Okay. Erin, did you have any question or comment?
Well, mine was kind of piggybacking off of David, so I don't know if you want to move on or not. But being at Old Mission, too, we do have a unique situation here with many students that are higher achieving, fortunately. And I think we've always had that challenge of how to show growth, and like he was saying, sometimes the appropriateness of what they're reading, it's hard for us to find the right things for them. So maybe going deeper into comprehension strategies or other ways for them to show growth, and how is that measured, I guess would be maybe my question. Is that something, are we still considering DRA data and some of those that information as a way to help with our teacher evaluations?
I guess that's what I'm joining. Sorry, Sanders. I guess that's what I was trying to explain was, I think it's a very specific thing to reading and maybe phys ed, is that you get to a point where it becomes unhealthy for the kid to be running further or doing that many push-ups at 9 years old. I'm with math, right, what's the next step? With science, right, what's the next step with the development? Great. Writing, keep expressing, add vocabulary. But with reading, I think, what Erin's saying is that I've got a daughter that's in 3rd grade. She's an advanced reader, but I don't want her reading certain content. Sorry.
All right, let's keep moving on with the metric presentation. I hear what you're saying, David. I do think that that's a deep discussion that we can delve into outside of the Hangout, because I know that that's obviously something that's concerning But I also want to make sure we give the opportunity to hammer through the rest of the metrics because we have lots of viewers viewing in live and who will be viewing the recorded broadcast.
Of course. Let's move on.
Okay, Joe, Jesse, can you guys continue? You're both muted. Continue to hammer it out.
Sure. So one of the things that Sander talked a little bit about at the beginning was the idea of proficiency versus growth. If you look across that scale, the 1 through the 4, you'll see that this isn't the percentage of kids who hit a proficiency mark. It's the count of kids who hit their adequate growth target for the year. So NWA says the student should grow by 7 RIT points to maintain their percentile for the year. And then we literally, at the end of the year, we count kids. We don't average how much growth occurred within the classroom. We say, did that student make their adequate growth, yes or no, and then go through the 25, 30 kids in that classroom. So when you're looking at that 3 range, see if Brandy,
she's going to pull up the 2-5 one.
Oh, she's going to pull up the grades 2 through 5 now. You're looking for the 3, which is the target for effective rating. You're looking for 65 to 79% of your students to hit that they made that adequate growth. So you're not looking for the average growth to be anything. You're not looking for the average proficiency to be anything. You're just looking for 65 to 79% of your students to meet or exceed that growth target that NWA set for them in the fall. Does that percentage make sense that we're counting the kids in the categories?
Mm-hmm.
Which again has kind of been an effort to make things more fair. The same way, in a at-risk, lower-achieving school, try to stay away from proficiency data if we can. Also, averaging kids, while a high outlier can pull things up, those low outliers can drastically pull scores down if we're averaging. So that's why we're doing the count Jesse's talking about.
Mm-hmm. And some of the questions that have come to us this year have been, well, what if I have a student who enters into my classroom in February? How am I? That student at this point in time is not going to be determined in your overall rating for your student achievement data. For your overall rating for your student achievement data, it has to be a student that you've had from the fall all the way instructionally until that spring window closes. So yeah, we'll have some kids who move in and out, but that's not the majority of our population. So we're really going to base the student achievement rating on what is the majority of that teacher's population doing throughout the entire year. So they won't count for or against you. They just won't be in the calculation at all. If you have a student who moves in February, we have no fall score on them that was under your school.
Jesse?
Yeah.
And Joe, can you talk about, when we were in our meeting the other day talking about teachers that teach only math in the elementary and they trade students? Remember we talked about that a little bit at our meeting the other day?
Yep.
Great point, Beth. Brandy, can you jump back to that slide with the rubric and kind of slide over to the left where we can see the first column? What Beth Still's mentioning happens at the elementary level, and it happens in some ways at the high school level too, where we tried to make a rubric that is common for large groups of teachers. Some teachers have kind of hybrid assignments. For example, this 2nd through 5th grade core teacher rubric includes math, includes reading from NWA, and includes writing. Well, in some elementary schools, particularly in 4th and 5th grade, people will departmentalize or specialize and might just handle math and science, or might specifically focus on reading as a real common one. So in those situations, the teacher would just work with the principal in their building, and the principals are all talking to each other about these hybrid situations. For example, if I'm a reading specialist and I work primarily with 4th and 5th graders, I would not, what my principal would probably say is, we're not going to apply that 7.5% in the top row that has to do with math, and instead the row that has to do with reading is going to count as 15%. And then depending again on your assignment, you might discuss whether or not the writing part applies. So I wouldn't necessarily be substituting in other metrics, but just weighing the metrics that do apply more heavily and omitting metrics that don't. And again, teachers would work with their principals
And the reason,
agreement on that.
yeah, the reason that makes really good sense, and I just want to make sure that I'm clarifying that, is that if a teacher is only teaching reading, that means they're probably teaching 2 flights of kids or 2 different groups of kids, right? Because you're switching for, as we talked about, switching for reading and math or whatever.
Mhm.
So it would make sense then, they'd, instead of having 1 group of reading and 1 group of math, each at 7.5, they'd have 2 groups of reading. So it would make sense that then that would you'd combine those 2 percentages into 15%.
Yeah, they should have the same number of data points, right? Instead of having data points in math and in reading, 60 total, they have all 60 kids in reading for the number of data points they have.
Right.
Joe, do you want to go through a high school rubric? I know that our teacher's on our elementary, but I know Rick's on, and there might be some high school teachers working. That one's a little bit different.
While you're making that switch, any questions from our teacher panelists or teacher principals about what we've shown so far?
I think it's probably explanatory in the rubrics, but to talk about split level classes, so that would be based on all of your grade levels, but a 1-2 split would be one that they're operating in 2 rubrics, so that they'll be working with their principals on that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so wait, we do have 2 questions from viewers that I want to get to.
Okay. Do you want to hit those now, or do you want me to talk through the high school one?
I'm trying to read them here. Will my principal give us a copy of this? Yes, but I mean they currently are shared via Google Docs with all of teachers, right? The folders are shared with all teachers across the district.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I'm not sure if the folders are searchable right now. The link to the folders, each principal will share it out in every building if it hasn't been shared out already, and the link is also in the slides that Brandy has up there. Brandy, can the people viewing on air, can they see the links we have in the chat window there? Are they able to click on those?
They can't see the links in the chat window, but the link was provided when they joined to watch the Hangout, or when it was shared out on their Outlook calendar. The link to the agenda, which are those slides, it will be right in there.
Okay. And it's the last slide on the agenda has the link if a teacher wants to jump right to these folders.
But I would say my answer to Sandra would be teachers can ask their principals to give them access to these rubrics too, if that's convenient. I had some teachers who wanted a paper copy. Go ahead, I can print it out for you. It's not a problem at all. We are right now, the principals are charged with dispersing these rubrics this entire month, giving them out to the teachers, making sure the teachers have looked at the percentages, understand the language on them before we really lock in and start the creation of how these templates, at the end of the year, each teacher won't need to come back and collect all their data. We're hoping that our data system over at Saban will be able to collect them and create templates for the teachers. So we are hoping that principals during this month are pushing out these rubrics to their staff and getting some feedback on them. And Joe, we'll go through that at the end. I know I'm jumping ahead, sorry.
Yep. Okay, and the other question before you jump in, and I know we've only got 15 more minutes really to hammer through this, and there's always a lot to share. But the other question that we got from a teacher was, one question some of the teachers at our building have is about units of study writing rubric. It is sometimes difficult to score students who are far below grade level. How do we use these rubrics appropriately to show growth, even if it's from a 0 to a 0? So how do you show growth maybe within within that part of the rubric? Any quick comment? I think that's a deep level question that we ought to have Biz.
Well, Biz did respond to that. She said, for example, if you have a 5th grader who's reading at the 2nd grade level, then you get out the 2nd grade rubric and you score them on that. And at the same time, if you have a 4th grader who's writing at the 5th grade level, don't give them a 4 on the 4th grade rubric, because then there's nowhere for them to grow. pull out the 5th grade rubric, score them on that 5th grade rubric, and then they'll have room to still grow. I would encourage them to talk to Biz if they're really worried about that, but the directive from Biz and kind of her English staff was you use the rubric that applies to where the student's at, not based on their abilities and their performance that they've shown you, not, hey, they're in 4th grade, so I'm going to use the 4th grade rubric, even though currently they're writing at a 3rd or a 2nd or 1st grade level. Beth, did you want to comment on that? I know.
Yeah, we talked about that, and so the big question was, how do you know what level they're writing at? And so Biz said to try the different things just like you do with your reading assessments, and you try it and you see what level they're working at, and that's their instructional level, and that's the rubric that you would use. Does that make sense?
Yep. Okay, let's move on to the high school. I just want to make sure that I'm answering the questions posed by our viewers so that we're engaging our viewers in the broadcast.
So you can't see the title, or maybe you can see the title at the top. This would be a typical rubric for, call it a high school math teacher. Okay. And this is a good example because this is similar to most of the core content area rubrics in middle school and high school. So that first row there, it has some kind of metric that's specific to math, and it's specific to the kids that teacher actually taught, that they actually saw in their classroom. So in this case, we're using that Explore Plan ACT sequence, and what percentage of kids either maintained or grew their percentile on those Explore Plan ACT math measures over the course of the year. And you can see the norm there is just that we need 51 to 75% of kids if the teacher's percentage falls anywhere in between 51 and 75, it's a 3. If it's 76% or higher, it's a 4, and that's based on going back and looking at a number of years of students taking Explore Plan and ACT and TCAPS and what percentage of kids had their percentile change. So again, it's based on historical data. Brandy, if you slide back over to the left, the other thing that's common about this with the high school rubric, the bottom row that you can't see right now is school level growth. That's the one Jesse explained before, where everybody in the building is kind of owning the last 3 years of state accountability data. But that middle measure, the Marzano Research Lab student survey, that's a new thing we're trying this year. For Central and West, our 2 big high schools, this has some familiarity because it's a similar student survey to how we would give the building-wide student survey when we did the Coalition of Essential Schools surveys, when both schools were in the smaller learning community grants. But basically what this is going to be is a one-time survey that's administered school-wide, so teachers are not giving it to right now, teachers have 5 classes. They're not giving it, I'm sorry, at the high school level, they're not giving it to every class period. But every student in the building will take this survey once. So we will have building-wide student perception data. And then for a teacher to earn a 4 for that percentage, all they have to do is look at the building-wide perception data and then reflect on what can I do in my specific role, my specific assignment as a teacher, what can I do to help improve this building-wide data in the next year? What are some specific strategies or student behaviors I'm going to target to help this building-wide thing? And again, just the reflecting and planning is all the teacher needs to do to get the full 4 and that 5%.
I would just add that that's also at the middle school level as well.
Right. So that's a typical secondary level rubric then. All of the 612 core content rubrics have that Marzano research survey and have that school level growth metric that Jesse mentioned before, and then something specific to the content area that's specific to your kids. So it's a little balance of the specific kids I work with and then also the building-wide work that we're all a part of.
Any clarifying questions? I realize we have elementary school teachers on the Hangout, but any questions that you might anticipate from a high school teacher about what was just shown there? Okay, well, let's open it up to just overall questions, because that might lead us to show some slides that we haven't shown so far. So, you know what, phys ed, I know, David, you had mentioned, do we have a phys ed folder that we can pull up?
Well, that was coming from last year when I was as a member of the teacher. I know it was part of the PLC. We had the discussions about You know, when we were doing the bleep test, sort of distance running, you know, children at a 5th grade level, they have to run for 18 minutes, 20 minutes to get a 4, and then, but it gets to a point, it's kind of the same with the reading, is that does it get to a point where it becomes maybe unhealthy to push them any further while their body is developing the way it is? I don't know whether that's been addressed this year. I know they're all doing FitnessGram now. I know that's been spread out across the district, so that might answer my question. I'm coming from last year's PLC.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So there's the beginning of it right there, David, where and this was the process that was used for this is the K5 phys ed, the principal who's kind of been working with K5 phys ed teachers is Tony Quinn. He's been using they've dedicated some of their PLC time to really hammering out these metrics. And so, yeah, using FitnessGram is a big part of that. The only thing that I'd like to comment on as we give everyone a chance to kind of look at that is this idea of reading and fitness and hitting a point at which it might be, you know, unhealthy to continue to sort of advance or whatever. Is that I think that, you know, you're right about a kid, you know, let's say a 3rd grade kid can hammer out 100 push-ups. It might be unhealthy to have him keep going or her keep going, so they're doing 200, 300 push-ups. But in terms of then taking a more expansive view of that and looking at overall physical fitness, I think that maybe gets to your point when you talk about flatten out. I just want to make sure that we're interpreting that in the way of, okay, you can do so many push-ups. Now let's look for another type of physical fitness to pursue. And the same way with reading, that you might hit a certain, but then we know that there are many components to reading.
Absolutely.
You could look at vocabulary development. You could look at, you know, instead of just you know, ratcheting up the you know, the fiction reading that a kid could be doing. There are ways to have them explore nonfiction areas of interest that could be at a higher reading level and continue to challenge them as a reader. So
absolutely, that's exactly what I was referring to. You know, some of the strategies I've used in my class are introducing them to the classics. You know, Mark Twain, Charles Dickens, some Shakespeare even. So doing poetry, doing the non-fiction stuff. But what I guess movies have ratings, games have ratings, books don't, and maybe they shouldn't. And there's a debate there to be had in a completely separate situation. But the exposure to that, like the parents have to, you know, these 300-page books, you can't expect a parent to read every single one before they allow their kid to read it. And often the children have seen a movie, and in order to get a certain rating, the movie cuts significant sections of the content out so that it can be shown, so it gets the exposure it needs, so it gets the PG-13 rating. But the book, if it was allowed to be created as a film straight out, would be like an NC-17 or an R.
Right. Well, and I think that what you're speaking to is why classroom teachers, why discussions between parents and classroom teachers are so important, why that building that partnership is so important, why having library media specialists engaged with classroom teachers and with parents is so important, because working through situations like that, having that kind of dialogue and trying to customize that learning experience for those kids who are advanced, that's why you got to get those people talking to one another and being able to glean from each other's expertise. So anyway, that's just a broad brush there of what's available for a K-5 health and phys ed teacher. Brandy, why don't you kind of just continue to scroll through, maybe pull up a music teacher. I guess that's about all we're going to have time for. While she's doing that, are there any other clarifying questions or comments from our panelists? Okay, well, go ahead.
I do.
Yeah.
I want to know if this is etched in stone So has it been accepted by TCEA, or do they have any kind of vote, or?
Great question. So that kind of leads into the last point. Brandy, on that last slide, do we have the link to the? Did I put the link to the form on there for feedback?
I think you did.
Yes.
Okay, before you get into that, Joe, let me jump in. That certainly we've been giving TCEA leadership a heads up about this stuff. Okay, but I'll just be open. I don't think Jeff would have any problem. Jeff Leonhardt with me being open about it. That Jeff and I had some conversations at the beginning of the year that it was his interpretation that student achievement data was off the table completely for teacher evaluation this year. And our interpretation of that, my interpretation of that was that my reading of the law is that it says that it still needs to be a significant factor. And so that's why we chose to keep it at 25%, because it was 25% last year. Unless something changes in the law, it's going to be 50% of a teacher's evaluation next year.
Right.
And so we thought it was reasonable, 25%, keep it consistent. The state wouldn't have any argument with the interpretation that 25% is significant. Okay. Then the other piece of that, though, is I think this is a real thing that we hear from, whether it's TCEA leadership or just teachers in general, this sort of feeling like TCAPS administration, boardmen or principals or even teachers, whomever, feels like we need to constantly outdo everyone. You know, we just ratchet up the expectations beyond what the state even wants or whatever. And I will say that we've been trying to stay consistent with what the state. By the way, mute your mic if you're not, because I'm getting feedback.
Sorry.
That's all right. The state has, like I said, it had to be a significant factor. We feel like 25% would meet with that. We're not going to exceed that. So I feel like we're right. We want to be right in line with the state. And then the question is, well, why don't you just? It's sort of like, well, no one said these exact words, so I'm going to exaggerate for effect. They would say something like, well, why don't you just snub your nose at the state and we can do our own thing? And because I think that not that other school districts are snubbing their nose or whatever, but maybe they're not going to the level that we are. You know, my wife teaches up in Leland. I don't think Leland's going through this process like we're going through to try to get these student achievement metrics kind of hashed out. But the difference is, and Paul Soma, and I just had a conversation about, it seems like we get chosen for every random study, every audit, TCAPS, whether it's something to do with charter school authorization because we authorize Greenspire, or whether it's some kind of financial audit or whatever. And the theory that Paul has is that they can come up, and it always seems to happen like on a Thursday, Friday. So the theory that we have is that they can come up here and be on vacation. They get to stay the weekend, and they get to audit the largest school district in northern Michigan, because they're not going to come up here and audit a small district. Okay, they get to come up and say, hey, we got a good chunk. We got 10,000 kids, a district representing 10,000 kids, and so I just want to make sure that I put that into the lexicon, into the understanding that folks have out there that part of this is that we are the most inspected school district in northern Michigan, and so for us to just sort of ignore or hope we can slide through without being put under the microscope, that's just not realistic, because the history has been, and this goes back decades, and it's certainly been confirmed in my short, I've only been a part of the executive team now for, a year and a half. I've been a part of enough state-level inspections or audits to know that we need to be in line with it, and we can't just say, well, this too shall pass type of a thing. And sometimes that leads to this perception like we're trying to outdo these expectations, and so I just wanted to have that. So we're up against this hard deadline. Joe, if you could finish up, and then we're going to sign off about how we're getting all teachers involved, giving them an opportunity to give us feedback.
Okay, so there's multiple ways teachers can get feedback between now and the end of January. One way is to talk directly with your principal after your principal presents it in the building. Take some time to go through the rubrics that apply to you and ask any questions or get clarifications from your principals. Go ahead,
or
Jess.
your building ARs too. Your building ARs is a good person to go to and give some feedback to as well.
Yep, and your principals will be making a point too of looping back with your building ARs to see if there's any feedback that came through that channel. And then there's also a link on the last slide of the presentation today, and your building principals will share this link too. And this is just a simple Google form where you can click on what rubric am I talking, or what building am I from, what rubric am I talking about, and what things need to be clarified, or what questions do I have about that particular rubric. Then what will happen with that feedback, these are all draft rubrics right now. A lot of work from principals and teacher leaders has gone into creating the rubrics, but we'll go through every bit of feedback that we get to see if there's any improvements that can be made right now, or what improvements need to be made in the next cycle next year. And then we'll start to work with the technology department on how do we collect this data and get some of that clerical work off of teachers and have things ready to go when evaluation wraps up in May and June this year.
And I also want to just close up by saying that, you know, when I mentioned the dialogue that Jeff and I were having around this, the one thing I want to make sure that I say is that I think that that's good dialogue. I certainly understand, you know, Jeff's got a role to advocate and to really look at it from all the teachers' perspective. We really have, I think, we've hit a really good spot in terms of being able to talk about tough issues, not necessarily always agreeing and moving forward, you know, to you know, compromising when we can, coming to good solutions when we can, not always agreeing, but a lot of times we have been able to agree and move forward with solutions that are 100% satisfactory to, you know, to teachers and to administration, and then we know aren't going to get us in trouble with the state, you know. So anyway, I think that you know, I'm attending elementary concerns every month, really trying to listen to what the concerns are and solving and working towards solutions for those things that are brought up. And it's really just helped stay in touch with that. The secondary level doesn't necessarily have the same structure, but you know, I have ongoing dialogue with both Jeff and Allison regarding different issues that are being brought to their attention from the membership. So so these are, you know, the thing that I think is happening with a very, very active legislature is that it's really going to take a commitment to work through these problems, to continue dialogue, to continue to try to calibrate and make things workable, and work together as a team, come together, because you know, public ed, we've never been under as much scrutiny and really unjustified criticism as a group, and it's not just teachers. That's principals are in there too, and I think district level administrators too. That we're all in public ed and we're all working our tails off on behalf of the kids that need us every day. So. All right, we've kind of come up against that hard deadline. I just want to say that the piece that I think we showed that feedback form, but we've also had this in front of teacher groups leading up to its current state. This is sort of like the final piece of feedback that we're seeking before it quote unquote becomes etched in the stone for the remainder of the school year. And then the other thing to really consider is that this. You know, this is sort of a starting point, and it really gives us a good step in the right direction for really practicing how data is going to impact teacher evaluation. Because I think we could have maybe gone for the fool's gold and tried to hope that the state wouldn't come in and inspect us and not had any data on a teacher's evaluation, and then next year it's at 50%, right? And then it's sort of a shock to the system. And so at least this gets us closer to really being able to look at how student achievement data can be a part of an evaluation, how principals and teachers can work together about, okay, this is what the data is saying, what next steps do we need to take to see us move the needle as an individual classroom teacher and as a building. And so that's another, I think, benefit to the work that all the principals are engaged in. I said at the beginning, this isn't Jesse and Joe's project. They certainly have done quite a lot of the coordinating and a lot of the thinking, but it's really involved all principals and teachers across the district. And not everybody agrees, but I think that it's certainly a step in the right direction in trying to hit that sweet spot between what's being required of us by the state and then what's fair and reasonable and workable from a teacher's perspective. So, any final words from any of you folks? Okay, I really appreciate everybody's time and attention, you guys joining in the Hangout and all of our viewers. Thanks a lot for tuning in.